This photographer has produced work that manipulates light and time in a way that forces viewers to think of the camera as a sort of time travel device that can encapsulate hours of time into a single frame, or can explore history by propelling us years into the past. He's orchestrated his instruments to create portraits of kings long dead, made seas stand still, interacted with cavemen and polar bears, reconsidered how math and science play a role in the world of art, and placed entire movies into single still frames. This is Insight for Inspiration, Hiroshi Sugimoto. Today I wanted to start veering away from just talking about street photography and talk about different kinds of photographers, different kinds of photography, different artists, and just different things altogether that might inspire us to create new and unique work. And I thought that Sugimoto's work was a good place to start because he's done so many projects that are so different from one another, but still in some way, shape, or form come back to the same theme. Hiroshi Sugimoto is a Japanese photographer born in 1948 who has dedicated his artistic career to creating projects that question what is and is not reality, and how photography can be used to blur the lines between what we perceive to be the truth. The best way to truly understand who he is through the examination of each of those projects. To watch a 2-hour movie is simply to look at 172,800 photographic after images. I wanted to photograph a movie with all its appearance of time and motion in order to stop it again. In this series that focuses on theaters and drive-ins, Sugimoto plays with the idea of time and history by taking long exposures that last the entire duration of a film and compress that into one single frame, taken within the walls of historic theaters that either continue to look pristine or have become derelict in their neglect. The theaters and blank screens captured in Sugimoto's work force us to question our relationship with cinema individually and as a society while gazing at frames that are equally beautiful and haunting. The idea for this project came to Sugimoto in a dream that he describes as a complete pre-visualized manifestation of what was to come from it. If I have a vision, my work is almost done. The rest is a technical problem. And there were a lot of technical problems that Sugimoto had to nail down to get this project to look exactly how he wanted it to look. The first of these issues was sitting through many viewings of the same films to capture the image as he imagined. To do this, he had to sneak his camera into a screening, set it up without being noticed, then take the lens cap on and off repeatedly to avoid the effect any flashlights from theater ushers might have on the exposure. The difficulty continued when he had to calculate the correct amount of time any exposure would have to be to capture these films in their entirety, which couldn't be accomplished by simple math that calculated exposure with runtimes, because certain movies are overall darker than others. So this was a series of trial and error that Sugimoto says was not easy. I was very, very patient. This project evolved over the years into a more recent iteration that used abandoned theaters as the location instead of beautifully well-kept ones. These took the dreamlike and eerie images to another level that interfaces further with the idea of time travel brought on by photography. These rooms were all once beautiful theaters now on their last legs, chosen as a way of reflecting the potential downfall of humanity in contrast to the beautiful buildings we once inhabited that have become disregarded. Sugimoto chose to take this deeper by creating photos with films that highlighted the same fears of potential human extinction, with On the Beach, a film about nuclear apocalypse, and Godzilla, a film that addresses what can happen when humanity takes experiments that affect the environment too far. What we believe and understand of photography in its most basic form is that it captures things as they unfold in reality. This is what allows our senses to become manipulated as we look at the work of Hiroshi Sugimoto. His photos of polar bears, vultures, wolves, ostriches, and other wildlife might appear to be real when seen at a quick glance, or without any context. But none of the animals in these photos are living, as all these photos were taken of dioramas in museums. This project, taken in 1976, was Sugimoto's first conceptual work. His desire was to convey a false reality by using a series of techniques that would make the museum's dioramas convincingly lifelike. He did this through the use of black and white film that could create more consistent and unified tones throughout any of the frames. The removal of all context clues that would allow viewers to realize these photos were taken in a museum, and very long exposure times of 20 minutes that allowed him to play with the reflections around the subjects and sort out the best way to have these subjects stand out from the background. The misidentification of these photos as real-life events is only made apparent once you consider that it would be unlikely that a photographer could get such close proximity to the events that were unfolding without disturbing them. And once the caveman photo is seen, that makes you reconsider all of the photos that you previously looked at. Part of the point of this project is to draw our attention to the interactions between human beings, our past, and the environments we share with previous life forms and other life that currently inhabit the same space. The fact that these scenes go on undisturbed in situations that would be impossible to interface with in a stealthy manner directly correlate to how many of us hardly consider what impact our actions might be having on the world around us, and how certain species might be gone for good because of our actions, just like these fleeting photographic moments. In relation to why he is drawn to dioramas in the first place, Sugimoto has stated, "The way they present us with something simultaneously dead and alive speaks to the very heart of this aesthetic." Sugimoto uses monochrome long exposures combined with twice infinity focus to create a series called Seascapes. These photos, much like the theater project, are meant to construct a dreamlike vision that blurs the lines between dreams and reality. That is conveyed in this quote from Sugimoto. "Mystery of mysteries. Water and air are right there before us in the sea. Every time I view the sea, I feel a calming sense of security, as if visiting an ancestral home. I embark on a voyage of seeing." Since the 1980s, Sugimoto has made images of his Seascapes series at bodies of water all over the world, including the Sea of Japan, Caribbean, Mediterranean, Adriatic, Irish, and Marmara Seas, as well as the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, among others. Deciding when and where to shoot these photos has to be entirely up to Sugimoto. He was once asked by Bono of U2 to take a photo for this series from his estate in the French Riviera, after being flown out on a private jet. But he refused to do so strictly based on the fact that Bono asked him to do it. Regardless, one of Sugimoto's photos appears on the U2 album No Line on the Horizon. Since 2017, these photos have been captured at an observatory on New Year's Day, because that's a time when there will be no boats in the frame to tamper with Sugimoto's true vision. Sugimoto's continuation of work that plays with the expectations and trust people generally have in photography comes through in a series of portraits that combines a consideration of what is and is not a portrait with his manipulation of time and focus on history. This series has allowed him to take photos of Princess Diana, Salvador Dali, Oscar Wilde, Fidel Castro, Henry VIII, and Napoleon Bonaparte, along with additional celebrities, public figures, and historical moments. He has created these photos through the use of black backdrops and dramatic lighting techniques with long exposure times of around 9 minutes. This setup is meant to replicate the lighting that would have been present in prestigious paintings of these figures. Similar to his photos of dioramas, if you see these photos at a glance without any context, there's a moment of confusion about how they were created before it becomes painfully obvious what's going on. These are not somehow photos of the historical figures in the flesh. These are not photos of actors portraying those figures. But these are somewhat hilariously wax figures that are captured in a very serious manner that create portraits that are unlike any that I've seen before. They were made at wax museums in London, Amsterdam, and Japan beginning in 1994. The wax figure of Henry VIII is based on the paintings from a court painter of the British Crown during the 16th century. Sugimoto based the styling of these photos off of those paintings, as an attempt to see how he could replace painting with photography, by creating detailed enough reproductions with an alternative medium. Reflecting on the photos, Sugimoto has stated, "If this photograph now appears lifelike to you, perhaps you should reconsider what it means to be alive, here and now." Sugimoto has also dedicated a few projects to structure. The first is all about capturing architecture in a unique way. This series began to take form in 1997. A total of 90 structures have been photographed for this series, including the World Trade Center, Brooklyn Bridge, Chrysler Building, and other well-known pieces of modernist architecture. To capture architecture, Sugimoto used large format cameras with intentional blur created through his technique that involves shooting with the focus set at twice infinity. He did this to reveal images that capture the form, soul, or essence of a building at their inception, because he believes that a finished building is the tomb of architecture. By making photographs that only showcase the ideas, inspiration, and mentality that went into creating the building in the first place, he is bringing it back to life. Because the creative process from concept throughout construction is where Sugimoto believes the building is alive in the mind of the architect. Another project dedicated to structure is directly linked to pedagogy and mathematics. In this series, Sugimoto made close-up photos of models used to teach mathematics concepts that resulted in images that look to be of magnificent structures. This series is called Conceptual Forms, and is a project that eventually evolved into another series called Mathematical Models. For the original series, Sugimoto used models from university classes that had wear and tear that added texture and form to his photographs. For the later project, Sugimoto constructed his own models made by combining mathematical equations input into computers that could create stainless steel and aluminum models that were completely pristine. The creation of these photos was influenced by the early abstract photos of Man Ray, who Sugimoto sought to outdo. Reflecting on this project, Sugimoto has stated, "Art resides even in things with no artistic intentions." This series was initially inspired by a technical problem peculiar to photography: the static electricity generated by friction between a sheet of negative film and the film holder. Such discharges can scar the film and ruin the image recorded on it. While common sense might make it seem like the kind of project you'd want to avoid, because of the destruction it would cause to the photographer's work, Sugimoto embraced it as a means of creation. However, this effect did not happen on command, so Sugimoto turned to different devices that would create electrical shocks when needed. First, a hand-crank device from the 18th century called a Wimshurst electrostatic machine. Then later, a Van de Graaff generator. With these machines, he would drive electricity into metal plates that were holding unexposed film. Sugimoto conducted a variety of experiments to see how the electricity would react differently to different metals, in order to create these prints, which resulted in a series known as lightning fields. Hiroshi continued to work on his projects that played with time and history through a series called Sea of Buddha. It took Sugimoto 7 years to gain access to this site for his photography. After persistent effort, he was finally given 3 hours a day, over a period of 10 days, to create the project he envisioned. It consists of photos of 1001 wooden sculptures of Buddha that have been covered in gold and are nearly indistinguishable from one another. But their slight variance forces viewers to look at the minute details found in photographs that also bear broad similarities to one another. The idea was to capture photos of the Buddhas as they would have looked in the morning sun during the Heian period, around 1,000 years ago, by removing anything from the temple that was added after that period, therefore capturing the images exclusively in natural light. This project is also intended to relay to the viewer ideas about the existence of art that has passed through long spans of time, and whether or not art will continue to exist as we know it now, or have in the past. It leaves Sugimoto to ask the question, will conceptual art survive for another 800 years? Opticks is exactly the type of conceptual work Sugimoto considers to be potentially fleeting in the future. It is the only series he has created in color. This work is a pure examination of light and how it interacts with the world. It is also a further look into how science and math are interwoven into art, because it was inspired by Isaac Newton's discovery that natural light isn't white, but actually a combination of 7 colors. Each of these images was created using Polaroid cameras to capture images of light as it passes through prisms, which are often compared to the abstract expressionist paintings of Mark Rothko. As he works on what he believes will be his final project, he says, "I just keep making it, and when I die, then that's the end of my art." Looking back on all he has created, at the age of 76, ever examining history, art, and the interplay they have with one another, Sugimoto states, 90% of my life is gone. Yet, I start to feel kind of nice about how the history moves from one generation to the next.